Welcome to the Storied podcast. I am your host, Chaz Becker, and with me, as always, is Jesse Ojeda, my co host. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about Sabbath as a mental health practice. I think a lot of times we talk about it as a spiritual practice, to which it very much is. But I want us to kind of think about it through the lens of how it just helps us with our mental health and improving that on a weekly basis. And so looking forward to this conversation and diving in, and hopefully there's a couple of good nuggets in there for you as we dive in. And so, Jesse, how's it going, man? How are you?
It's going great. I think this is a topic I love to talk about in my spiritual communities and also my psych and professional ones, because I think there is just such clear overlap. And I think in many ways what we're discovering psychologically is really just a spiritual reality, that we can connect to our biology and connect to our mental health. But it's just something that is so baked in to how we are as humans. So I'm excited to talk about it today with you, Chaz.
Yeah. The the reason I was thinking about this um is I've been having a lot of conversations in our circle or our small group, um, just about our culture and how do we engage with it, and um, where we're at as a culture. And I was thinking about what makes America such a superpower. Like, what was it behind um, America that helped it grow and become so influential in the world? And when I think about that, I think about this culture of productivity. Um, Americans are productive people. They get a lot done. And that became a very pervasive um, mindset of the American people. And it, I thought it was normal, like being productive, like living in America, like the idea of trying to optimize every hour of the day to get as much done as possible is like that is just the air we breathe. Um, and then I took a trip to Australia, and another very developed world, another developed culture. Um, but they have a much more relaxed style of living. And I was like, it's the the most interesting way is like when they talked about like being productive is like the air we breathe. Is that's what it felt like. It was like I'm like the air here is different. Like I don't know how to explain it. It's
Yeah.
like just like the the vibe, the pace in which people lived their life. The the there wasn't this consistent drive to always get things done and be running around. And so it was kind of this like eye-opening experience. Um, and I came back from that. I'm still, this was in college, and then I started learning more about the practice of Sabbath. I, I didn't really do it um, until a few years ago, and really started like taking it seriously. Um, but what I found is that, and what I believe is that the American drive for production and output is one of, I think, the massive drivers in our increased struggle with mental health. Um, and that Sabbath in our current cultural landscape is a rebellion against that. Um, and so those are my like opening thoughts on this topic of Sabbath, and what kind of like led me to wanting to lead us to this conversation is connected to this like production culture of America.
Yeah. I mean, I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think Sabbath is a way, we just talked about identity in a previous episode. Sabbath is a way that we decouple our identity from our productivity. We do not just identify as people who work, people who perform. We don't identify our value from what we do. We identify our value with who we are, which is incredibly a biblical principle. And I think me and you both growing up in an American context, I think even in myself coming from um, the East Coast and the New York metropolitan area, growing up in North Jersey, running at a million miles per hour was just the norm. Everyone talks faster, they work harder, they play harder, and it's a culture that just is in this cycle of run, 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 run. And I think we can only do that so long before we hit a wall. And some people are really good at avoiding the wall until they're forced to come to it down the line. But I think one of the most helpful aspects for my spiritual formation, my spiritual growth, was hitting that wall because I recognized that there's an implicit lie that runs under that, which is I can be the master of my own life, that I can serve myself in all the ways that I need to work, to play, and that is the ultimate end. And I think what Sabbath, as not just a mental health practice, but as a spiritual practice, reminds us is that rest is rest allows us to connect with our God, with ourselves, with others around us that God has placed in to be active forces in their life, and to submit that our ability is not what gives us value, that God gives us our ability because we have value already that He has instilled within us. And I know I'm getting off on the spiritual train again. I know we're talking more about mental
No,
health
you're good.
stuff,
You're
but
good.
gosh, it just is. I think it's so important. Obviously, this is very much the bread and butter of a lot of John Mark Homer's work and a lot of the practicing the way curriculum. And actually, my first exposure, I think, to this concept was when he first released the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which I think we've talked about here on the pod before. But I do think that, something that he taps into and talks a lot about is like, this is something that like the tech bros and the entrepreneurs have been catching on to in the past 5 to 10 years, that they've been discussing ways that they want to move away from the consistent work all the time, story that we tell ourselves that that's somehow going to get us to succeed. They're discovering this, whether it's through Eastern spiritual traditions or what they think is just kind of smart productivity habits. But really, at the end of the day, it's Sabbath. It's a form of moving away from our normal rhythm to establish a time of formal rest into our lives. And I think that's just secular discovery of a spiritual reality, like what I started by saying, right? But I think there are ways that this is becoming more of a conversation because certainly our culture is only becoming more consumeristic based. I think of social media as the primary driver of that. That we're thinking about when I show up to something or when I arrive at something, what can I get from it is kind of always the first question I'm asking. How can I get the most gain and the least amount of give in whatever I spend my time doing, which is not necessarily, surprisingly, a biblical value or concept. Um, and I think, like you talked about, Sabbath is a way that we reorient the affections of our heart, the desires of how we approach the tools that we utilize, how we approach the ways that we interact with others. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's so much there. I know I'm going on my own ramble at this point, and we can
No,
get
you're
into some of the more
good.
explicit.
Well, here's my question. We talked
Mhm,
about production and then consumption. There's like kind of these
mhm.
two things. We're being productive so we can consume. Like it's just like this
Yeah.
um cycle. So how does living in that cycle like negatively impact our mental health? That's kind of the question I want to throw over to you.
Yeah, so I just think of life as performance is what comes up for me, and I'll be first to say that I'm speaking from experience in that when we link our value to our performance, if we are not always running at 100% or performing well, we will have such a poor relationship to ourselves, because our internal metric of how we gauge who we are and how we're doing is consistently in sway, because we're not meant to perform 100% all the time. I think this is unfortunately something that's baked into us from the earliest age, right? From our grades and how we follow rules or how we perform. Whenever we are consistently judging ourselves by our comparison to others, that sets up a way that we learn to feel safe and connected to ourselves. I think this is the hardest thing for a lot of like high performing, kids who go into honors programs and eventually into honors tracks in high schools and are in competitive environments. Is you teach individuals from a very early age that they define themselves by how they stack up to others, and rather than just based on what they're doing and of themselves and the value that that inherently has. I think that just basically generalizes to how we perform in work against others. Who's up for that promotion? How much money do I make in comparison to others? How does my curated life on social media looking in comparison to the other people around me? Um, that comparison game is always going to lose. I think it's something that we always wind up losing in the end. And the other way that I see that is somehow thinking that the level of performance that we have will give us the most amount of pleasure and the least amount of pain, which I think is another sort of Western cultural lie that we believe, that as long as we can avoid enough unhappiness and we can approach enough happiness, that that is truly what flourishing looks like. I think it overlooks a lot of the realities of certainly what many of the spiritual masters in and out of religion would tell you, and what other people are catching up on, which is there is an authenticity that passing through suffering allows us that we cannot access otherwise. That not to say that suffering is inherently good, but that it is an inherent reality of life, that we learn the realities of life through passing through suffering and arriving on the other side of it. That pain can often lead um, to real lessons and real understanding, and honestly, connection with other people's suffering. I think that actually, to me as a clinician, is something that has not made me understand the suffering that I've walked through, but see how that actually is a gift in the way that it allows me to access other people's pain. When I suffer, I know how to empathize with other people's suffering. And in that, that's the compelling aspect of the Christian story, is that we serve a God who understands suffering, a God who came to suffer himself. That is literally talked about in scripture. So I think that, uh, yeah, I think in that, if we're talking about how comparison affects our identity, is one of the ways that we can just become so limited in how we view the work that we do and how we identify with ourselves, because we're always playing a game of catch up. We're always playing it's they call it the especially in the pleasure aspect I was talking about before, the hedonic treadmill. Think about it as like a hamster on a wheel. Like, we're chasing after um whatever dopamine hit, whatever fulfillment in the short term that we think we can arrive at. And then we learn that that doesn't satisfy us anymore. We know this lesson from biology. With any sort of substance we use, good or bad, eventually, if we use it more, we have to learn to use more of it because our body habituates to it, whether that's something as simple as Tylenol or something more potent and destructive in our lives that can take over, whether it's a behavioral substance or an actual substance. That principle applies to just what we enjoy and what we do. And when we learn that just chasing after more and more and more of pleasure is not actually going to fulfill us, I think that's where we start to learn that allowing ourselves to take the break, step off of the treadmill, is actually something that will give us more fulfillment in the end. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, Chaz. I know you swim in these waters too, like I do, in
Mhm.
terms of reading a lot of this content. So I'm curious what of that stands out to you.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, the thing that I was thinking about is the rise in anxiety, and I'm just picturing the high performer, the person who's always trying to like be at peak performance. They're just trying to make sure that they're putting out the outcome, and then like that's going to create the happiness, and just the franticness of their inner life, as they're always trying to get to the next thing, as they're always trying to meet what are like unrealistic expectations for their life, and that culture is what's producing the rise in anxiety that's so prevalent. And when you're living out of this constant fight or flight state, like that will then produce these negative mental health outcomes in terms of anxiety. And then it leads to like depressive states. And, you know, recently, this past January, February, I started experiencing some like pretty extreme depressive states. And yeah, it just got to like a pretty low point in that. And as I'm coming out of that and I'm reflecting on that season, that performance piece, and particularly around my work, came to a point where I was like, it was super unhealthy. And I was like super burnt out on my like day job, which is leading me to like, hey, I need to find something different to do you know, in my day-to-day work, because like what I'm doing right now is like not sustainable for the long term. And part of it is like I don't want to do it. Like I like to make it sustainable, to make it like I don't want to do this work. I'm done doing it, and I want to do something different. And so I'm taking steps to figure that out. But then making those steps to like make that transition and has been super helpful in that, because I got off the hamster wheel per se, right? Like it's like, okay, I'm making a change. I'm not going to stay on this performance hamster wheel. I'm going to let go of these anxieties and these things that are like leading me to not want to be engaged in my day-to-day life. And I'm going to step into a new way. And I think what Sabbath is, and that, to use my own personal, like, as like what Sabbath is that, like we said, getting off the hamster wheel. It's that rebellion against that production culture, that output culture, and stepping into a reliance in Jesus and saying that he's the master. I'm not the master of my life. I don't control all of my outcomes. But Jesus is the one who holds the universe together, and that he's the one who is continuing to work. You know, I think about our one thought I had, and have every once in a while, is the idea that like we have to sleep. And while I'm sleeping, God is working in the hearts and lives of someone else on the other side of the world at noon. You know, like it's 3 p.m. in China while I'm dead asleep to the world, and like God is working in the hearts and lives of people there. And like what Sabbath is an act of worship and turning to Jesus and saying, this, like, you are in control of my life and the world around me, the lives around me. You are in control of my income, the way I provide for my family, the suffering and the joy that I experience. You hold all things, and I'm going to surrender to you as my God and Savior, and the creator of the universe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop doing all the things that I do to produce, and I'm going to enjoy you. And so I think in that, what it does is it allows your brain to like actually rest.
Yeah.
instead of
It does.
staying in constant fight or flight. Um, and I think one of the funny things is you have to do the practice over and over again to like actually get the result. Like
Yeah.
if you Sabbath just
You can't just do
once,
it once.
yeah, if you Sabbath just once, you're like, all I thought about was all the things that I didn't get done. And
Yeah.
it's like one, evidence of the problem. Two, you need to keep doing it so that you don't live out of that state when you Sabbath. Um, and so you have to do it. You got to commit to like 6 months of once a week just taking a day of rest. And you're gonna be surprised like what happens in your life and in your brain, how you think, what you're thinking about, how you think about that day, will change because yeah, I think the first time you try it, you're just gonna think about all the things you didn't do. And about how you kind of like wasted the day. And it's like, that's
Yeah.
kind of the point. It's kind of the point.
Yeah, well, it's about changing our desires, right? And we don't change our desires through one singular practice. We talk about this in Storied all the time, right? That these practices are not some magic bullet. Really, what they do is they help form us in new ways in which we are desiring things that are pushing us closer to God in the way that God intended us to live our lives. And that inherently is better for us. That is better for our flourishing, better for our connection with other people, better in our individual actions that have us live out the fruits of the spirit. And one time at Sabbath, one time in centering prayer is not going to change the desire of, oh well, I want to do this thing because it makes me feel better about myself, this thing being my productivity or my performance in comparison to other people, or how much I stack up in comparison to other people. What it does is it forces us to desire other things. It forces us to desire things that are better for us. And that takes time, because for every 10 or 15 minutes you think you're living in centering prayer and you're living in connection and abiding with God, you have basically 18 other hours of the day that you are being formed by other things. You're being formed by a world, especially for us in the American context, that is shouting messages and ways to live our lives that are in complete opposite. So we're fighting against a tidal wave, truly. And I think that's a really helpful image for me to think about as I'm almost swimming against the current, because it reminds me how important it is to keep up with the practice, how important it is to remind myself of the reality that exists, because so much around me is trying to convince me otherwise. But beyond that, I wanted to talk a little bit more, just because we did structure the episode around this, of some of the like real cognitive mental health benefits of Sabbath. So some of the ones that come up for me that just rattle off at first is obviously the biological component, right? We need rest. Our bodies need rest. Any of the research that comes out about our need for sleep consistently shows that we need a lot more than we actually get, and that we need higher quality sleep than we get. I'm sure you've noticed, as I've noticed, so much more consumer products around sleep quality, fitness trackers, different things to help as sleep aids, not only because of the anxiety you talked about beforehand, which is affecting our sleep, but also just our physical inability because of what we're eating, what we're consuming, what we're putting in our bodies, what we're thinking about all day. Is just affecting our ability to rest. And our nervous systems can't keep up with that. We need to just allow our body a natural process that it desires. But in many ways, what also the kind of concept of Sabbath more broadly does is Sabbath allows us to lower our cognitive load on various tasks that we do, right? The idea of Sabbath is that you're doing something that you enjoy. You're doing something that is bringing sort of a long-term benefit to your life, in the sense of it's something that connects you to yourself. It's not just productive for productivity's sake. It's what's that new hobby you've always been trying to do that you never have time for. It's what's that thing you used to do a long time ago that really made you feel like you were uh, doing something that you've always wanted to do, but that you've devalued because it's not quite productive, or you can't do something with that, or maybe it doesn't stack up in comparison to other people. Something as small as, oh, I'm gonna cook myself a fancy meal once a week. Like, I'm going to spend some time like calling a friend who I don't get to hear from that often for an hour a day during Sabbath. That allows us not only to lower the cognitive load of not putting that on difficult tasks, but also increases our connection to ourselves, which is going to increase our intrinsic motivation and our intrinsic value that we feel. It's also going to connect us to other people, where you get into the whole literature around attachment, platonic or romantic, getting into valuing the need that social relationship plays in our lives and the ways that that speaks into our life by increasing our own connection, hopefully increasing our vulnerability towards others. That can increase the intimacy that we experience with them. And especially when that's done in good relationship, where it's mutually beneficial and pushing each other towards um, becoming that either best that we can be, or in the Christian sense, kind of pushing us towards what God calls us into. I think that's something that also Sabbath really encourages us to do, because it's, again, forming us against how we define ourselves in productivity and pushing us more towards the things that matter in our lives. Um, Other things you could think about is just really not only just the cognitive reset and sort of the social connection, but the stuff we talked about identifying ourselves outside of productivity and by our intrinsic value that we have. Because I think Sabbath is a declaration in a consumeristic, late capitalist framework that we are our value for who we are and not what we do. And it's a reminder consistently of where our identity lies, which recalibrates us to our values and recalibrates us towards the actions that we take to live out those values. So to try and use more secular or like psychological language around it, I think those are very similar to all the things we've been talking about, but could be just as present on a podcast to Diary of a CEO or Andrew Huberman podcast, right? As opposed to how are we just talking about the spiritual reality that is Sabbath.
Yeah. So how do you do it? Right?
Yeah,
It's like, okay, because what I think when you think about Sabbath is like, okay, I don't leave my house, I don't do anything, I just like sit around and I'm bored all day, like that's like, and it's
yeah,
like, all right, and so I'll share a couple of my thoughts on that, and then you want to fill in
please do.
where
Yeah.
you want. Um, but I think the first step is your pace.
Mm,
Like you don't have to do anything fast. Nothing has to get done. If you start something, it doesn't need to be finished. Like it's just like just slow everything way down. Um and that first step. So like today we're making this like is typically my Sabbath. I'm still going to call it my Sabbath because one, we're recording the podcast, and if an episode gets botched or something like gets messed up, like whatever, that's okay. Um, this podcast isn't something we are producing something, um, but it's not the production of my normal day, right? Like,
yeah.
um, the the pace, like I messaged you, I'm like, hey, running late. Like part of it was like we were just taking it slow. And like I was like, I'll get to it when I get to
Right.
it. I'm not
Yeah.
too worried about it. Um and two, this is really fun for me. This is something I don't get to
Yeah.
do weekly. And then I get to connect with you, right? Like this is a time where we get to have fun just talking about stuff we like talking about. Um
Yeah.
and and that I can be producing this podcast today and that is fun. Now, I'm not going to be doing any of the editing because that is not fun and that
Yeah.
feels like work to me. So I'm not doing any of that part today. But the sitting down, recording, talking with you is fun, enjoyable, and I'm slowing the pace down on this. After this, I'm going to Home Depot to think about some house projects we're working on, and I'm going to get started on some landscaping that we're doing. And so you're like, so that you're doing work. How's that Sabbath? And it's like, well, I don't need to finish any of it. We're going to go at a slow pace. It's not what I typically do in my work. Most of my work is sitting at a computer, like calling people and um, doing sales. So manual labor is outside of like my normal work. And so doing that is going to be something fun for me to do today. And I'm looking forward to it. And I'm going to do it at a leisurely pace, and it's not going to get done. I'm not like, oh, I got this house project and I got to get it done today. And like there are house projects that are like that. But that's not this. And I'm prioritizing that for my Sabbath because it's going to be something fun to do with the Lord today. And um, a it's kind of that thought of reducing the mental load because it's something so different than I do on a regular basis. Um, the thinking is so different that I'm not super anxious about it. I'm just like looking forward to having fun going and um, removing some grass. Like that's all I'm doing today. Like this is the
Yeah.
house project is making flower beds, so I got to kill some grass and pull it up. Um, that's fun. Cool. And so I think just like the reason I share some of those things is to like help us reshape and rethink like what the heck is Sabbath? Like it's not just sitting in your house by yourself all day, like meditating and praying. I think there should be a portion of your day that's that. You should, if you want to take a nap, go do that. Like, but the thought is like slow your life down. And if you are going to do something, it's not out of like, I have to get this done. It's like, this is just something I want to do. And I'm going to do as much of it as I want to. And if I'm halfway through it and I'm done wanting to do it, then you can just put everything away and go do something else. Like, um, and, and it's working on that mind shift. And if you're in the middle of a project and on Sabbath, right? If you're doing something and you're feeling this like, oh, I have to hurry up to like get this done. Like stop, put everything away and go do something else on
Yeah.
Sabbath. Cause like you're now going into the part that you don't want to do. And so I really want to kind of like demystify Sabbathing a little bit. It's really
Yeah.
just living your life in a non-productive, like in our current context. I think a huge way to think about this is like living a day that isn't around having to get things done.
I would even add, just as an important, kind of final thought, it doesn't need to be a full day. There have been times that I've had to live in Sabbath where I could afford a full day, and that was really amazing and beautiful. There have been times I said, I can really only afford to do this well, like 6 hours, maybe even three. Like I can take a morning from 9 to 12, and that's about the amount of time that I Sabbath. And honestly, I think having more of a thought process towards can I do this more fully for a shorter amount of time is way better than can I sort of, half do it for half a day or half do it for a full day. It's going to be way more restorative if you really are able to Sabbath fully and turn yourself off for 2 or 3 hours rather than attempting to kind of half do it and not really fully commit to it for 12 to, 12 or more. So I would just encourage the listeners as well that don't think you not need to be limited to it being a full day. If you can only do it for a small portion of time, that's a great place to start. And maybe you'll find ways that you can reorient other parts of your life that can even expand over time, or you enter a different season of life and you're able to do more. But right now, I'm thinking about, going into the summer, I'm about to have a lot more space to be able to Sabbath more fully. And I'm excited for that. But the past 3 or 4 months, it's been maybe 3 hours the most I can get if I can. And I think that rhythm is more natural. You don't need to judge yourself for that. I think there's a way that, especially if you're incorporating this into your life for the very first time, taking it slowly and doing it for a short amount of time will actually bring the practice more authentically in your life in a way that you'll be able to live out more as your space naturally opens up in different portions and seasons of your life.
Absolutely. So, one thing I want to throw out there, if you're listening to this, is as you're stepping into Sabbath, if you're like, this is what I'm thinking about doing for my day, and can you help me think about like how to make this Sabbath? Jesse and I have, I'm assuming, open DMs. My DMs are always open
I do.
on
My
social
DMs
media.
are open. Yep.
Yeah. If you're listening to this and you're like, hey, I want someone to help me with my Sabbath routine, just message us and we'll be happy to just like say, hey, yeah, like if you're doing this, think about it this way. If you're, it's like maybe you don't want to do that. Like it's really connected to like your normal day job. Like I don't know if you want to like spend your time doing something that's so adjacent. Something like that. Just reach out if you have questions. We want to help you. And so I want to just kind of like invite that if you've made it this far into the episode and you're thinking about wanting to dive into Sabbath. And then yeah, if the other side of that is if you're a Sabbath expert, tell us like what you like to do. And so, but with that, we're going to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much. Love you guys. Peace.
We'll see you later.